All right, everybody, let's get started. Thanks for jumping on today. We're excited for this webinar, for this discussion. Think it'll be a powerful and good discussion today. The title, I should say, is Learnings about Nurse Hiring and Retention Study Results from 400,000 Nurses. That number was so large, I almost incorrectly stated it. So that's good to have a large data set when you're doing something like this. So thanks for jumping on. We're joined by Sara Sweat today, the head of customer success and experience at Incredible Health. Sara, thanks for joining us today. We're excited to have you. We'll introduce you more fully in just a second. A couple of housekeeping items. We really want this to be interactive, so please ask questions. If you have questions, you can go to the Q&A or the chat section of Zoom here and just type those in. We'd love to address your questions, either throughout or at the end. We'll do it wherever it best fits. And then the second thing to note is we are recording this. So if you want to share this with people in your organization, if you want to share it with colleagues, friends, whatever, that's great as well. So we'll send that recording out a few days from now. So thanks for jumping on. Sara, it is now time to fully introduce you. So please introduce yourself, and thanks for taking the time to come on the webinar today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, McKay. As McKay said, I have the privilege of heading our client success team. I have been in healthcare tech really for my entire career. Spent about the last year and a half here with Incredible Health, but I actually got my start as a recruiter. So I have been the person who's carrying 100, 150 rec loads and trying frantically to keep up. Very familiar with the sort of chaos that ensues when that happens. And so I love getting to work with hospitals and health systems from across the US to help them leverage not only our technology, but industry best practices to both attract and retain top talent.
Awesome, Sara. Thank you for being on. Thanks for jumping on the webinar today. So let's dive in here and talk through what we're going to discuss today and how it's going to work. And we'll try to be somewhat quick. I should say that, like, we're big fans of not having 60 or 90-minute webinars if we can help it. We'll try to keep this relatively quick. So first, the nurse labor market today. We'll address that. We'll explain briefly who Incredible Health is. We'll talk about the study itself, how Incredible Health can help, and then we'll take your Q&A, as I mentioned before. So why don't we dive right in and talk about the nurse labor market today. So the biggest thing, and we all know this, kind of explaining an obvious problem, but the demand for healthcare is rising as the population ages. It's been the #1 employment sector in the US now for 5 years, hard to believe. 1 in 8 Americans work in healthcare. And that means that it's harder and harder, more challenging to find workers to staff healthcare. Particularly, that happens with nurses. And this is a national problem that's getting worse. By the end of this year, 1.1 million nurses short in the labor market, 18.7% average annual acute care nurse turnover. So that's not improving. It's actually getting a little bit worse, about where 1 in 5 nurses turning over annually. And then labor as a percentage of revenue, 48%. And then this one's the shocking one, Sara, and I'm wondering if you could speak to this one a little bit. So that 89 days is kind of a shocking statistic for the average time to hire a permanent specialized nurse. We see that stat a lot, but I think that might be surprising to someone who's seeing that for the first time. Any color you can give any of these pieces of data here, Sara, or any commentary?
Yeah, that's the stat that really stands out to me as well, McKay. 89 days. The goal for our clients on our platform is to be hiring in sub 20 days. Because typically the savings between the hourly rate of a permanent nursing staff versus a traveler, just for that 69-day delta, is typically enough to fund an entire partnership. And that doesn't even take into account things like vacancy and overtime and staffing ratios that we know are leading to burnout. So the faster you can fill an open role with an experienced permanent nurse, the more you really protect yourself from the implications of the stats that we see on this slide.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's really interesting that it takes that long to connect, to go through the process, and to hire. So what does Incredible Health do? Well, hospitals use the custom matching technology that we've built to hire high quality permanent nurses in less than 20 days. So it's essentially an open marketplace that allows nurses and hospitals to find one another. Nurses go on there for education because they're looking for jobs. for good content, and hospitals are able to go in, find nurses in their area, and hire them in less than 20 days. Sarah, what's the reaction usually of a hospital when they're used to that 90-day turnaround and suddenly it goes to 20? That's got to be kind of a rewarding experience for you who talk to those customers all the time.
It absolutely is, because I think what every talent acquisition team in hospitals and health systems across the US knows is that speed is truly your superpower. Not only when you're able to hire more quickly, do you more rapidly shift the ratio of travel to permanent nursing staff on your floors, but you actually capitalize on top talent. Most nurses across the industry, regardless of how they come to a health system, are fielding multiple competitive offers in the current climate. And what we know is that 61% of them are going to accept the first offer they get, even if offers 2 and 3 are for more money. So speed is really the thing that we have to be focused on. And when we can create that impact for clients, not only does it create the dynamic that we just talked about, but it's really enhancing and creating true savings and hard revenue for those hospitals to continue to operate with.
Yeah, and that's the key is the time and the money savings that has a real impact. So great point. Okay, let's talk about the study. Let's talk about the parameters of the study. So 2,500 nurses surveyed, and then additional data from more than 400,000 nurses that are on the platform. And we're up to what, 700,000 now, right, Sarah?
Yeah, very
Crazy.
close.
Yeah, so we're actually meeting later today to talk about releasing the new version, the 2023 version of the study. So excited for that. So stay tuned for that. We'll see what data changes here, because this data was predominantly gathered in February of 2022. So it is about a year old. We're releasing the new version of the study here, as I said, in the next few weeks. Okay, let's talk through each one of these data points. We've kind of categorized this. So let's talk nurse relocation first. So the study found that nurses are more willing to relocate for a job than ever before. The number of nurses who said they would reject the job offer because of relocation dropped 28% from the previous year. I think this might be a kind of a trend. Like, people are more willing to be a little flexible here, it feels like. Does this surprise you with post-COVID, like people wanting that more like, close to home experience, or does the flexibility of it fit into what we learned about the American worker and the American nurse during COVID, Sarah? Like, how does this fit into the bigger picture, maybe?
Yeah, I don't think this surprises me at all, actually. I think COVID completely changed the landscape of workforce in America. And certainly nurses and healthcare workers were not immune to that shift. What we see on our platform is about 20% of the nurses who accept positions are actually moving states. About 25% move markets, meaning they're in the same state, but they are moving from a different market that's far enough away that they require some sort of relocation to get there. And what we see when we talk to nurses is not only is there this willingness to move, but there's actually an excitement about it. It allows them to potentially move closer to family, move to more favorable states, move to warmer climates. And so we see relocation not only as something that's continuing to happen, but I think even accelerating across the market today.
That's great. All right, travel nurses. So 77% of nurses say they see an increase in travel nurses in their unit. This is becoming more common. But here's the interesting part. 32% of nurses in permanent roles say that this increase has made them feel dissatisfied or extremely dissatisfied, and that the compensation differences, meaning the travel nurses being paid more, were the leading causes of dissatisfaction. This one I think is interesting, that I guess it's not surprising because hospitals are just desperate to make sure that those units are staffed. But is it surprising to you the dissatisfaction that it makes permanent nurses feel?
It really doesn't surprise me. I think that, as you said, this continues to be one of the most utilized staffing strategies for health systems, and largely out of necessity. In fact, less than a quarter of health systems are actually anticipating a reduction in dependence on this strategy, which is the most expensive staffing strategy for them to employ. And so what we see is that having a high volume of travel nurses on the floor can really erode morale in the permanent staff, because they know they're doing the same job And they know that their traveler counterparts are making, in most cases, 2 to 3 times what they are in terms of an hourly rate. So, travel nursing is a great option for many experienced nurses. We will always have travel nursing, but hospitals and health systems are operating on razor thin margins. So it's vital that we help them have truly sustainable recruitment and retention practices to support the permanent nursing staff that are in place, so that can be the most prevalent staffing strategy for health systems. It's really just financially responsible and in many cases necessary.
Great. All right. This one I thought was really, this one surprised me. This one was crazy. So 65% of the nurses surveyed said they'd been verbally or physically assaulted by a patient or patient's family member within the last year. I was blown away by this statistic, but nurses that I've talked to personally and that are, family and friends are like, no, this is not surprising to them at all. Take on this statistic, Sarah. What are your thoughts on it? And do you think this is a problem that's here to stay? Or what do you see with this one?
Yeah, it's really sad, isn't it? Right? I mean,
It really is.
Yeah, that really, it's like I feel that in my bones. 65% of nurses. It's no wonder that we see burnout and turnover rates at high levels. The reality is we're a really stressed population, and chronic stress and trauma, which many of us in the nation have been through, and certainly our nurses have been through, it just increases the likelihood for violence. And nurses are feeling the brunt of that. It's not new. It's always been a part of that. And it's something that I think frontline nurses are identifying as a real barrier to retention for them. Working conditions are in the top 10 reasons that nurses leave employers. So we've got to have really clear processes in place and safe spaces for nurses to connect and process what they've been through. It's really just table stakes in terms of retention for nurses. They need to be safe at work.
Yeah, that's a really important thing. And regardless of the, reasons for it, it's a concern, right? All right, let's talk about turnover. What are the things that fuel turnover? And, how can we fix it? I think we'll talk about in the next couple slides. So 34% of nurses says it's very likely they'll quit their job by the end of the year. 40% cited burnout and high stress environment as the most common reason, even more common than benefits and pay. And then 42% of nurses say they've started a new role in the last couple of years. So this shows me a pretty transient's the wrong word, but movable workforce, right? Like being willing to move in just a couple years, saying they're very likely to quit their job by the end of a given year, et cetera, et cetera. I was surprised that benefit the highest reason, and that burnout and high stress were above that. But thoughts on this data, Sarah? Like any things that you're seeing from our customers here that back up this data?
Yeah, when I meet with chief nursing officers and chief HR officers from across the country every day, the most consistent thing that I'm seeing is that the reality is that the greatest competition for any health system isn't another health system. It's nurses leaving the profession altogether. Our nurse vacancy rate is increasing. Our RN turnover rate is actually increasing. And these are all despite the fact that many health systems have plans in place to help reduce these things. So what we're trying isn't working. And we're at really an inflection point. If we as a healthcare industry don't figure out a way to create a better and more sustainable model for our permanent nursing staff and find a way to slow this turnover, it ultimately becomes a quality of care issue for all of us as healthcare consumers in this country. And it's a big part of the reason why I'm at Incredible Health, because I feel like we have a very important piece of the puzzle to help connect nurses and health systems and share insights like what we've learned that can lead to greater retention and help combat some of the burnout.
Awesome. That's great. All right, top reasons nurses are leaving jobs. I think this is interesting. So advancing their careers, getting more flexibility or greater balance. And this one, by the way, is a challenge. We know that because you have to have people staffing at all times. And so flexibility is great, but you still have to staff a unit. And then reducing commuting time or relocating, and then earning higher compensation. I think we were talking to a CNO at a hospital system for a webinar recently, and she said this is also kind of generational, where like new nurses, younger nurses are demanding this flexibility and balance, but also want to advance their careers more quickly. And it's really challenging from the CNO standpoint to meet all those needs at the same time. So this one I think is just speaks to, I think maybe, I don't want to say a generational divide, but I also just think it speaks to where the profession's heading. Is that fair, Sarah? What do you think?
I think it absolutely is fair. As more and more experienced nurses retire, the average age of an experienced nurse is lower. So the reasons that they leave are changing to reflect the needs set of this current cohort and where they are in their life and in their career. So what we hear from nurses along these top 4 reasons is that they do want a more collaborative, more engaged, true level of career mobility planning. They want a health system that's going to come alongside them, understand their career goals, and really invest in them getting the experience and education that they need. Flexibility can look like internal travel pools, multiple shift options, float pools, self-scheduling, really just thinking differently about how we cover a floor and allowing for flexibility of model for how we do that. And I think, because nurses are willing to relocate at unprecedented levels, we also have to have really strong relocation packages and an openness to thinking about things differently than we have in the past. Because as you said, this new cohort has a different need set. And the industry, in order to retain those permanent nurses, is going to have to begin to think differently about how we staff those floors and how we meet the needs of this particular cohort.
Great point. Really good point. Okay. Retention strategies, career mobility. This matches what we just talked about. Greater flexibility, strong relocation packages, pay, and then constant communications. We've talked to CNOs who have put together leadership councils of nurses and groups of nurses that can provide feedback to management. These things are pretty easily done for no real cost and do make a difference. The other things are a little more challenging and take a lot more strategic planning. But any thoughts on these, Sarah?
Yeah, I think what we really know here is if we reverse engineer the reasons that nurses are leaving jobs, these are the obvious sort of retention strategies, and the data really backs us up here. We have the benefit of sitting in this really unique vantage point with nurses and health systems across the United States. And so we survey our populations regularly. Another recent nursing survey that we did, only 10% of nurses said that cross-training wasn't important to them. So we know that cross-training is going to help us prevent burnout, because one of the key components to that is inspiration. It's learning something new, being excited about something different. So with the ability to feel like career change is possible within the nursing profession, not only are we helping this current cohort, but we risk losing really qualified nurses from practicing altogether.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I think too, the approach that hospitals are probably taking here differs based on the type of workforce they have, maybe even where they are in the country. Like that's going to have a different tenor based on, relocation packages are going to be very different depending on where you are. So is flexibility, so is pay. So I think there's a ton of differences there geographically, but also with how hospitals individually want to approach it. Okay.
I think so too, McKay.
Yeah, go ahead, Sarah. Go ahead.
If we could just go back to that, I think recently our nurses told us that relocation and benefits are actually among the top 3 things that they want to hear about in their hiring process. So we think about pay typically as hourly compensation, but nurses really don't, especially when we're talking about permanent positions. One great way to advantage and bias for permanent employees is to offer a host of ancillary benefits, some of which you outlined, and many of which are low lift, or low cost, but can provide a different working experience for those permanent staff. So relocation is a great way to sort of start that conversation. If we're offering relocation benefits that are thoughtful and in many cases tied to retention benchmarks for that health system, it's setting the tone for that nurse about your investment in the financial and logistical implications of them accepting a position at your facility and potentially having to relocate to do that. So if from the start, I feel like my employer really understands my experience and is trying to remove barriers from the path, that tells me something really important about the culture that I'm walking into. And that culture, we hear from nurses, is just as important as compensation. If a health system is paying at least above the 50th percentile for their market, and they're offering competitive shift differentials for nights and weekends, and they have a compensation package that is multifaceted, not only are we going to attract more talent, but it allows for healthier, happier employees who can deliver excellent care, which is really the goal of what we're all trying to accomplish.
Love that. That's great. Great sum up, Sarah. Awesome job. All right. How can Incredible Health help? This is, I think, the core. So about 650 health systems and hospitals use Incredible Health to hire permanent nurses in under 20 days. And it seems like there's a ton of benefit here, but I think the 2 or 3 most obvious is probably instead of 89 days, it's taking under 20. In some markets, it's actually less than that. It's like 14 or 15, right, Sarah? And then that saves a ton of money. Like we're talking millions of dollars per hospital over the course of time, right? Like what's the data we have around money, cost savings because of how rapidly these nurses are being hired?
Yeah, we know that health systems who leverage Incredible Health are typically saving about $2 million a year through that partnership. We have many health systems that are well above that benchmark. And I think part of the secret behind how we do that well is not only leveraging technology, because quite frankly, without it, you can't hire at scale, but also leveraging our industry knowledge and unique vantage point to help health systems identify their own unique blockers or what's going to create competitive advantage for them in their market. We have the privilege of working with a really diverse set of health systems. These are academic medical centers, national systems, really strong regional brands. And I love working with our clients. They're an incredibly collaborative group of health systems who are genuinely trying to do what's best for their health system and for the patients that walk through their doors. And so they rely on us not only to help them hire quickly, but I was just talking with a TA leadership team the other day who were saying, thank you so much for providing the insight and the data to back up what we know to be true, but we haven't been able to convince our institution to fund appropriately, or we haven't been able to get our hiring managers to understand the implications of these simple process changes that would help us hire faster and get more staff. We really get to collaborate and come alongside those TA teams to help them make an impact in their own processes. And that amplifies not just what they're doing with Incredible Health, but their hiring overall.
Got it. That makes tons of sense. Love it. I also think it's interesting because I've heard people say, well, gosh, if it's so quick, does that impact retention? Like, do they stay for less less time? The answer is no. It's actually the opposite. They stay for about 15% longer if they're hired through the Incredible Health platform, which is awesome. So, yeah, look, nurses join Incredible Health for the tools, for the data, for some continuing education, for career coaching. A lot of good content, articles, things like that. And that's kind of what attracts them. And then they realize this is a place to find new jobs. So we connect these nurses with hospitals. So employers really apply to the candidates instead of the other way around. Nurses love that. And then we're able to really help with our technology to match the hospitals and the nurses together, which is what lowers that time and streamlines everything. Anything you want to say about the process, Sarah? Because you go through this a lot and know it probably better than anybody.
I think one of my favorite things about how we do what we do is the fact that we're leveraging technology to do it. We are not an agency, we're an algorithm. And that means that what we're doing is scalable. Most of the health systems that I work with every day don't have 10 or 15 openings that they have to fill. They have hundreds of positions that they are in desperate need of filling. And the only way to do that at scale is not to leverage humans, but to leverage technology so that we can adapt to the ever-changing needs of our clients and scale to the need of the support that they require.
Great. That's awesome. I think that's a great point. So this one's also interesting. Most RN candidates are accepting their first offer. And even when their second or third has higher compensation, which is really interesting. And then Sarah, we mentioned the cost earlier. This is how that cost is why it's so inexpensive relative to other sourcing methods, right? The time to source is less, the phone screen is less, like every step of the process is truncated and made more efficient compared to conventional hiring. But I think the time to source is obviously where a lot of the hay is made, if you will, which is, I think, the hardest part in a lot of cases.
I think so too. We have this unique benefit of building relationships with nurses. As you mentioned earlier, they're coming to us for a lot of different reasons, and a subset of those will be interested in making a job change. But because we have those relationships in place already, that time to source just dramatically reduces. It's our goal for every client on our platform to be able to pay for the cost of their partnership with us from the savings from their partnership. And so we work as quickly as possible to get those clients into an ROI positive situation, which comes not only from speed, but from the industry consultants that are part of our client services division, working alongside with their leadership to help them optimize their own hiring practices for this speed. So even in stages where we're not a part, we're not the ones doing the actual steps in that process, we're still influencing them to create an optimal experience for both the health system and the nurse.
Yeah, that's great. Love that. And then I mentioned the retention rate earlier. It might be counterintuitive, but it's true. Like nurses are still a 15% higher nurse retention rate after 1 year. That's great. All right, let's dive in to some of the Q&A here, Sarah. We'll go through as many of these as we can. So this one, what are the main issues you see with staffing the floor? Is it creating schedules that are flexible, creating hours that work across the board, moving people through different floors, units? Any suggestions on what works? Sarah, do you want to take that? Like issues that our hospitals are seeing with staffing. Is it about scheduling? Is it about moving people around? Like what does flexibility mean, maybe?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And unfortunately, the uncomfortable answer is yes, right? It's all of those things. I think the thing that we hear the most about, and we've been hearing the most about, especially recently from nurses, is the impact of self-scheduling. Allowing them to have a level of autonomy about when they're going to work allows for them to build a schedule that works for their particular life stage and create that flexibility. It adds a tremendous layer of complexity for the health system, right? And so you have to be really intentional about how you do that and what cohort of nurses are eligible to have access to that, but it makes a tremendous difference in retention.
Yeah, that's great. I think you've got to try all of that. I totally agree, Sarah. Like it's not just a, hey, do more flexibility on who's working weekends and that'll solve all of the things.
Right.
It's more complex than that, right?
I wish there were a silver bullet, but there just isn't.
Yeah, that's right. All right. Do we have an update to that 34% will quit their job by the end of 2022 metric? No, but that's what we're getting shortly. Like we're building that new study out and we'll have more updated data on that metric. Good question, Ronald. Another question. Is the 20-day hiring benchmark an average of all hirings through Incredible Health, or is that specific to certain markets, Sarah?
Yeah, good question. So that's our platform average. And certainly it varies by market. So we have clients who are both above and below that threshold. Large metropolitan areas tend to be a little bit faster, especially when we have a lot of marketplace density on them. Small rural areas might be a little bit slower than that, but that's our platform average.
Great. When another question here, I'm just going to read through these, Sarah. You're doing a great job. When employers partner with Incredible Health, are pay scales shared and then shared with the nurses prior to matching? So, like, how upfront is that? What do nurses see? Just kind of give us an overview there.
Yeah, so we really attempt to stay away from much in terms of specifics for compensation for individual positions. But we do host a employer showcase page on our platform where nurses can go to learn more about the facility, the unique benefits of that facility, and get whatever ranges or details about compensation that health system is interested in providing broadly to nurses who are considering matching.
Great. And then how's the matching work? Is it AI? Is it an algorithm? Do humans assist? Like, how does that matching actually take place?
Yeah, so we do have a proprietary matching algorithm that's looking at the information that nurses have provided to us. Just as a reminder, they're signing up once with Incredible Health. And so they're building a profile with things like what their experience is, where they've worked before, what it is they're interested in doing, their geographic location, any special certifications that they have. We're gathering all of this information about the nurse, and then we're matching those criteria to the criteria of the open positions that our health systems are offering. We're leveraging technology to do that, and then we stay in lockstep alignment with the health systems. One thing I'll tell you is that we find not only are the requirements for those positions, do they change often? Every unique hiring manager probably has their own expectations about what ideal looks like and doesn't. And so we leverage our recruiter advocate teams as well as our client partners to stay in lockstep alignment with the health systems to ensure that we're taking into account those preferences as well.
Great. Love it. And then last one here from Sherry. She says, are you seeing anyone utilize alternative schedules that match school year calendar or working in blocks of time like year-round calendars as permanent schedules? So yeah, she's got two questions. That's the first one. So are we seeing creative scheduling solutions like that?
Yeah, absolutely. And the school year calendar, I think, is great because oftentimes where the need for that flexibility comes in for nurses is because of the lower age of an experienced nurse. It's much more likely that they're going to have littles. And so school age children, being a factor in when they're available to work, can definitely come into play with the nurses, especially the nurses that we see on our platform.
Okay, great. And then second question she asked is, how do we measure time to hire? Like, how do we get from that 0 to 20 days?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we measure time to hire is based on what we have visibility to. So that means from the moment we submit a nurse for consideration by that recruitment, that recruiter or recruitment staff, until they have accepted an offer on our platform is how we're measuring time to hire.
Great. Sarah, that's all. That was awesome. Thanks for jumping on today. Any final thoughts for everybody on the call? Any final words of wisdom from someone as wise as yourself?
If I'm the paragon of wisdom, we may be in trouble.
We're in real trouble.
But I would just say thank you to the health systems that we work with every day and health systems across the nation. Retention is critical to helping us address our healthcare system in the years to come. And so I'm just so appreciative of how interested our health systems are in understanding the needs of nurses and building programs that allow them to be engaged and retained at those facilities.
Love it. Awesome, Sarah. Thank you. And thank you, everybody. We're having some people ask where they can access this study. Danny's going to post that in the chat, the actual written study. We'll also send it out in the email where the recording goes out as well. So we'll make that available to you. And then watch for the 2023 version of the study, which comes out in a few weeks. So thanks again, everybody. Sarah, thank you for taking time out of your very busy schedule to join us. And thanks to Danny, who's the silent partner on this webinar in the background. So everybody, thank you. And thank you for jumping on, everybody. Have a fantastic day and great rest of the week. Bye-bye.